Good evening. I'm Thomas Armstrong, and I am at Hearthside hearings. I want to thank Jordan and Priscilla for inviting me. I tell people I'm a Canadian Barbadian writer, simply so that they can have some sort of a way of slotting me. But basically I write fiction based in the West Indies. Almost everything I write is set there. Although I was born in Canada, I got married in 1980 to a black Barbadian woman. So all those years in between, we kind of moved back and forth between Canada and Barbados. So my life experience has kind of been shaped by that. By that event and other events, but in terms of my writing though, I'm 58 years old, and I started writing when I was 50, which is 8 years ago. Quite literally started writing. I'm not one of these people who wrote when they were teenagers and always wanted to be a writer. Writing was never on the horizon. If someone had told me I'd have a published novel at the age of 58, I would have laughed, because that was not on the agenda. But I wrote my father's eulogy late in 2002, and something about that experience made me want to write. So I just kept writing from that point on. So I wrote a series of short stories, mostly supernatural, because that's basically what I was reading. I've also, at the same time, was reading West Indian literature, so it's kind of like supernatural lit and West Indian lit, and those two actually intersect in a number of writers from the West Indies. It's a theme that runs through a lot of work down there. Anyway, around 2005, there was a planned family reunion there, and the nieces and nephews were organizing it down in Barbados. And it was supposed to be a talent night, and I knew that I couldn't sing or dance. So I thought, okay, I'll write a short story and read it there. Well, I ended up writing this short story. The reunion talent night never happened, and I had this story with characters in it that I really love these characters. And I thought, you know something, I could make a novel out of this. So I went to a workshop at Ryerson, novel writing workshop, and started writing scenes based on these characters. The scenes were totally out of chronological order, but they were just, to me, emotionally powerful scenes. And so there's a series of these vignettes. But the problem then came how to connect them all. And it took me about 5 years from the point that I started to write this novel to actually getting it published. And I would say probably 6 major rewrites along the way. But what happened was I entered the novel in a literary contest in Barbados, and it happened to win second prize. And my current editor, the chap that actually ended up editing the novel, is a Barbadian Canadian, so there were connections there for us. I didn't know him, but he because of the contest, became aware of the novel, and he recommended it to DC Books in Montreal, who published his work. And but I sent it to a lot of other publishers. HarperCollins read it and rejected it, and DC Books accepted it. So I said to myself, as soon as someone accepts this, I'm going to take that contract. So that's basically what I did. And this guy in Barbados did the editing, and I think really improved it. So, yeah. So I'm really happy, and I'm proud of the novel. So I'm going to read you some parts of the novel.
Have you read it in Canada and Barbados?
I have. Yeah, I have.
Where does it feel more comfortable to you to read it between the two countries?
You know, it's funny you ask that, because when I'm in Barbados, I especially tell the audience to I apologize to them for the fact that I'm going to attempt to read their dialect. You know, all dialects are phonetic, right? So you can render it on the page. In fact, dialect is rendered many ways, West Indian dialect and Barbadian dialect, and each of the islands has their own peculiarities. So although I can render it because I've read so much of it and I can hear it, I can't speak it. So in a sense, it's easier for me to read up here because the audience tend to be less demanding of my ability to speak the dialect. Although in Barbados, I'm much better known as an author than I am up here. You know. So yeah, any Barbadians that are watching or are watching the streaming right now, I want to apologize for the fact that what I'm going to do to your lovely dialect. But I have a piece here that I think is kind of representative of West Indian lit. The novel actually is about Edward Hamblin, who inherits a cottage in Barbados. And his father's deserted his family, basically has no connection to the island. He knows nothing about the island, but he's gone down there to see this cottage, which his great aunt has left him, his first trip to Barbados. And what he discovers is the island holds more for him than he ever thought possible. He decides to keep the property, and he becomes immersed into Bayesian society. And the village he's in is Hamblin Hall, which is actually named after his family. So there's an ancient connection with his Barbadian side of his family and the village he's in. And so what ends up happening is there's three basic protagonists. There's Mary Collymore, who's the daughter of a wealthy white Barbadian, and there's Sissy Brathwaite, who is a poor black peasant farmer in Barbados. And it's those three people the story revolves around. So, but in terms of West Indian literature, just one more thing before I get into the reading of it. It might help you to understand where this novel is coming from. To me, it's a classic West Indian novel in the sense that it is about an outsider being immersed into a culture which he does not understand. Now, maybe that's true of every immigrant experience, but I'm saying West Indian in general because the renaissance of West Indian lit happened in the 50s. And was basically writers from the West Indies had immigrated to North America and England. And some of the greatest novelists like Walcott, Naipaul, Middleholzer were all guys who were published in Britain. Their voices were finally heard. And when they wrote largely of the immigrant experience, right? The black immigrant in a largely white society. So what I basically did with this character Edward is I dropped him into a largely black society. I tried to flip it on its head. So the novel, I think, as you can see it on many levels, but one of them is his immersion into West Indian society. So this little story here will hopefully make you feel what it's like to be immersed into another culture. The government bus ran every half hour. It would take him into town, and from there he was on his own. Along the roadway, people and traffic passed. A large blue bus could be seen over the crest of a distant hill. The bus stop was crowded with uniformed school children, women burdened with heavy bags, men going to work, and other people whose business he couldn't determine. It wasn't clear if they'd all fit into the bus. Edward was among the last to board and stood near the front. A very large black woman sat nearby. Although the seats were made for two, her wide thighs covered better than 3/4 of hers. On her lap was a large bag of assorted vegetables. "Excuse, sir." "Excuse, yes, sir." Edward looked down to see the woman patting the small portion of the seat that was still visible. A young man moved as if to sit beside her, but she shifted her leg to cover the space. When the fellow stood back, she looked once again at Edward and smiled in a way that implied more than the offer of a seat. "A gentleman like yourself must sit. Look, Here, that is good for you? She shifted her body as a young fellow sucked his teeth. Some women across the aisle giggled. Edward felt he could not ignore her offer. She would likely interpret a refusal as an insult. Thank you. He balanced his right thigh on the edge of the seat, trying not to press too hard against the woman's leg. The bus took a hard turn to the left and began to descend a steep hill. Edward struggled to maintain his balance as his knee banged hard against the back of the seat in front. He looked straight ahead, attempting to avoid the woman's stare. Every few seconds, the woman looked over as if she was desperate to say something. Sir, you is from Hamblin Hall? Yes, I am. Now, what now that confusing? There are but two proper houses in all the Hamlin Hall, the Collmores